Welcome back. University of Miami Hurricanes football fans. We're getting closer to the season, so I figured I'd start ramping up the videos for this squad as well. And today we're going to be talking about Carson Beck and the offense as a whole. Can he lead the Miami Hurricanes to a national championship? So we'll go over the depth chart real quick. And I want to take a look at some of the key positions. We'll obviously talk at wide receiver. So C.J. Daniels was a huge addition this coming offseason, because we lost a lot of our wide receivers. Honestly, one of them that I thought was going to be the key guy he went to Georgia. Totally forgot his name. Oh, I think it starts with an I. Isaiah, tell me in the comments. C.J. Daniels is going to replace him at 6'2". He was a pretty decently developmental target in LSU. It's just LSU had their wide receiver U, so it's very hard. It's very easy to understand why he transferred here, because LSU, they're wide receiver U. They don't just get wide receivers. They get wide receivers that go in the first round of the NFL draft. So C.J. Daniels transfers here, and I think when you take a look at him, he had 562 yards last season with LSU. He was kind of like the third target. I think when you bring him over here, he's one of those guys that, again, can really take that mold of being the primary target just because of his ability to make people miss. He's got the decent size and stature and speed and all of that stuff. And, to be honest, it's one of those things that he has a lot of potential, and I believe that there's just so many players on that team that it doesn't really matter what you do sometimes unless you're like an elite talent. Now, am I saying he's an elite talent? No, probably not. I don't think that C.J. Daniels is going to be like a game-changing wide receiver, but I think he can take that role of being one of the primary targets on this team. The one key here, though, is Josiah Trader. He's going to be the wide receiver opposite to him. He's a sophomore, and I'm hearing a lot of good things from him. He is kind of the key piece to this offense for Carson Beck to really move the ball, because I don't know if C.J. Daniels is going to be the key primary target for the Miami Hurricanes. I think Josiah Trader has a lot more intangibles when it comes to, being a wide receiver. He's going to be the key piece. He's going to be the guy that, if he can develop into one of the premier receivers, because that's kind of what I think we're hoping for here, it can definitely be a very dangerous combo. I think C.J. Daniels is going to give you exactly what you need him to give you. He's probably going to give you around the range of like 700 to 800 yards receiving, 5-6 touchdowns. But if Josiah Trader can, honestly get to that 800 mark and become the premier guy, I think he's going to be the dude that we're setting all of our potential on, which we'll talk about the running backs in a second. There's someone like that too. He can be the guy that really steps up this offense. And then you obviously have Tony Johnson. He's going to be the senior guy. He's very similar to Restrepo, going to be the guy that's been here for a little bit. And, he's been in college for a while. He's definitely going to be the dude that is going to be the reliable target. I don't see him doing something crazy. And then you also have Ray Joseph, Keelan Marlin that are going to be around. They'll probably get a couple of catches here and there, but for the most part, those are going to be your wide receiver core, which I'm all right with. I think Carson Beck has some decent weapons this coming year. I think the one thing is it's a lot of potential. We don't really know what any of these guys can really do besides like C.J. Daniels, but you don't really know. It's a very unknown situation with wide receiver. And then we'll go to the running backs. You have Mark Fletcher, and then the person that I want to talk about is Jordan Lyle. And Jordan Lyle is someone that I think right now in the depth chart, just because he's a junior, he's been in college for a little bit longer, he's going to be the depth chart starter. But I think with Jordan Lyle, there's so many intangibles that homeboy brings to this University of Miami team that I think it's just going to be impossible for him to not become a starter. It's going to be a very similar situation to last year. We had Damian Williams and it was kind of like you started seeing Jordan Lyle get more and more of the snaps. Damian was cool. He's a power back. It was decent. It was some crazy runs last year where he'd have like 6 people on top of him. But Jordan Lyle, I think, is a much more similar to like a Lamar Miller or, some of those players that he has that full all-around type of game. He's fast, he's shifty, he's, good when it comes to finding the holes in the offensive line. I think he's going to be one of those dudes that definitely has a lot more potential. Mark Fletcher is going to be a good running back. He's going to be a guy that'll probably go in the 6th round of the NFL draft, but I think Jordan Lyle is the key here. And this is what's going to make this offense run with Carson Beck. A lot of people have speculation because Carson Beck, towards last year, there were some iffy games with him. It was some games that were really good. It was a very weird quarterback situation last year because it was like a lot of the quarterbacks that the year prior we all thought were going to be like 1st-round picks, like Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers, and a lot of those guys, they kind of took a step back last year, and some guys you never thought you would hear of, like Nussmeier and players like that, they took a step up where Nussmeier looks like the best quarterback in the entire college football league now. And what we have to remember is that Carson Beck, a year ago or a year prior to last year, he looked like one of the top quarterbacks in the nation. And, he did sign a $4 million deal, which is crazy for a college player. It happened so quick. But I think he's in a better situation. I don't know. Georgia, I don't remember the last time. What was a good Georgia quarterback that was produced? When was the last time that they had? I mean, I don't remember a Georgia quarterback that was like NFL caliber for a long time. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. But usually Georgia doesn't pump out quarterbacks. This is going to be much more of an NFL-style offense with the spread, the motions, all of that stuff. You're in the shotgun. You have to read a little bit of the defense. I think Carson Beck is going to do very well, but I think also we're going to have a run-heavy offense. I think that's something that, we didn't necessarily need to do last year, but I think it's something that we should have done a little more in some of these games because it was just Cam Ward passing the ball left and right. And I think some of these games kind of went to a certain point because we just weren't running the ball properly. Because we had some guys last year. We had guys that could definitely run the ball. Jordan Lyle was one of them. We had Johnson as well, the freshman, and we had some guys, but we just started going to the pass so heavily, mostly because our defense was hot garbage. Hopefully that increases this next year, and we'll make a video on that as well. But, coming into this year, and then you have the offensive line. I think this offensive line is either equal or maybe a little bit better than last year, and that's why I'm very confident in this. You have Brockermeyer, who was a transfer. He looks like a very good center. Like, he's probably going to go in the NFL draft this coming year. You have Maui Goya, who's another right tackle that's NFL caliber. Inez Cooper, he's pretty decent. You have Ryan Rodriguez and Markel Bell. Those are going to be solid guys, but I think we do have some NFL caliber offensive linemen this coming year in Maui Goya and Brockermeyer. These guys are going to be groomed to be something. So I think this offensive line is going to hold for Carson Beck. I think we have some receivers and running backs. The key here, obviously, is Elijah Lofton, tight end. I'm not sure what he's going to be about, and it's big shoes to fill. Another Elijah from last year. Big shoes to fill. I don't know if he's going to be like that, but if he's just a stable target, I think it will be someone that we can definitely rely on. But for the most part, I think the reason why we have a good chance this year is the defense has really elevated itself. I think that was the biggest problem last year is watching every game. It was phenomenal to watch Cam Ward, but it was like watching Dan Marino. It's like Cam Ward would score 45 and the other team would score 40. It was like constantly like that. And in the end of the year, it bit us in the butt where we were playing teams and we just couldn't score enough points to like battle our defense. That's what we were essentially doing all year. So this year, I think it's much easier on Carson Beck. I don't think he needs to make all these crazy throws. I think it's going to be much more of a run-heavy offense, and he's got the weapons. Josiah Trader, I think he's going to be something like decent coming this year. I don't know what he's about, but I'm hearing a lot of good things, and I think he can be something. And then C.J. Daniels is going to be that steadfast target. I think he's going to be someone with 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. I think he will be, talked about in the later rounds in the NFL draft. And then you have a very decent offensive line for this team. So do I think he can lead them to the national championship? Yeah, I think Carson Beck, he's got enough talent. And again, when you watched a year prior to last year, he looked like an NFL-bound quarterback. He looked like a dude that really, had the accuracy, very similar to Quinn Ewers, had the accuracy, arm strength, all of it. It's just this year, defenses started confusing him. I'm not sure what, it might have been some, miscommunications with the offensive line and things like that. But, certain games he just did not look good. But for the most part, I think this offense is pretty good. I think much more so. We'll talk about the defense in another video, but we definitely have a much more, I would say, it's very similar to last year. I think they built a team that's very similar to last year, where we had some decent receivers. I think, honestly, it's either equal. It depends on Josiah, but it could be equal or better than last year, because the reality of the situation is that, Cam Ward was just a baller. And, we had Restrepo and we had Isaiah, forgot his last name, and Jacoby. But, for the most part, I think the potential of these guys is definitely higher than the potential of those guys, with the exception of Isaiah, because I thought, he was an excellent wide receiver. But we have a very decent running back room, pretty solid offensive line. I just think it's up to the coaching, and I think if you can coach Carson Beck right, you can make him into a premier talent. He could probably enter the NFL draft. So I think we have a decent offense coming in. I think we're okay, and we'll talk about the defense later, but I think, last year was an anomaly. You had probably one of the worst defenses I've ever seen the University of Miami put on the field. That's not going to be the same this year. So I think we got a shot. We're going to start ramping up the University of Miami videos because it's almost season time, baby. So it's all about the U. Love you guys all. Peace.